the authority that's vested in us in the Constitution rather than subcontracting it off to the agencies and letting them run this government at will. So I appreciate the gentleman from Texas giving me an opportunity to vent myself on these frustrating issues, and I appreciate your leadership, and I yield back.
And our friend from Kentucky, reclaiming my time, our friend from Kentucky has been down here with me talking just about that act. And I don't know if you were in when we first started this. I have just proposed, because I see this tidal wave of regulation, this hurry up and regulate everything you can in a hurry going on by the administration. I will tomorrow morning file a bill to declare a moratorium on all regulations, and then have to come to Congress showing good cause why it's in the national interest for the good of all mankind that there be an exception to that moratorium, so that we would basically just call King's X, time out, and let's wait till the end of this administration, and we'll see what happens in the next one. And by that time, we can settle down and create a few jobs in this country, because they wouldn't have to, at least for the next 2 years, worry about regulations. So I'll get you a copy of that. It's real simple. No regulations for the next 2 years.
The gentleman would yield?
Yes, I will.
If the title of that bill is the King's X bill, I'm going to be very interested in signing on, and you'll back.
I like King's X. Well, I thank you, Steve King. You're a good friend, for coming down here and joining me. I've gone over what I have to say here tonight, and I just want to finish up by saying nobody is against doing the right thing. I'm against people who are creating regulations for the sake of regulations and damaging the people who are the job creators in this country. I'm for protecting the environment, but if you're belching out pollutants in China because you moved out of the United States because of onerous regulations, and you weren't belching out those pollutions in America because we had a good Clean Air Act in place before you wrote the bad regulations, then you're not helping the environment at all by sending that to an unregulated place in China or India. So let's get real. Let's try to set up an environment in this nation that creates jobs so Americans can go back to work. It's all about going back to work. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 30 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for recognizing me here on the floor of the House, Madam Speaker, and appreciate the privilege to address you. I came to this floor, one, to hear from Judge Carter and to listen to the presentation that he made, and the other component of it is I came here to talk about one or perhaps two subject matters. One of them is Obamacare, as one might imagine. And I'd make this point that, well, first, Madam Speaker, if it's possible that there's anybody that doesn't know why Obamacare is so bad, if they maybe haven't heard the argument in some time and they're forgetting about how bad Obamacare is, and if they're starting to hear the language about what's redeemable about Obamacare, I want to make it real clear: nothing. There is not one single component of Obamacare that's worthy of us making any effort to do anything except to repeal it all, eradicate it all, pull it all out by the roots. I listen to some members of this Congress that will say, well, don't you want your children to be on insurance, on your insurance when they're 26? No. I raised them to grow up. I want them to take their own responsibility. If they can be elected to the United States Congress when they're 25, then I think that's a pretty good age to at least say you were free on your own when you're, well, first you got your car keys when you were 16, your license anyway, and then you got to vote when you were 18 and choose the next leader in the free world, and you got to go out and, let me say, go into the tavern legally when you're 21, and get elected to the United States Congress when you're 25, and then they kick you off of mommy and daddy's insurance when you're 26. Somehow I think that delays the growing up process. I think that we need to have people growing up and taking personal responsibility at an early age rather than delaying that at a later age. And if the states want to have it at 26, let them have it at 26. If insurance companies want to provide for that market, let them write the policy to provide for that market. But the federal government should not stick a mandate on this that requires all health insurance policies to keep the kids on until they're 26. And let's just say they're a young person that gets elected to Congress, like I wouldn't want to, yes, I would think that there are some members of the new class that would fit very close to that category. Would one really think that they would come in here at age 25 and transition from their parents' health insurance on over to the federal opportunity of health insurance that one can access and pay their share of the premium that comes with this job working in this Congress, and maybe never have a window where they were responsible to go out on the marketplace and buy their own health insurance? I think that's actually a bad idea, but if people want it, let them drive that through their states. Some will say that we want to have pre-existing conditions so that children cannot be denied insurance on a policy that their parents have. Well, that's a good idea, and it's one that can be sustained by demand in the marketplace, and if that doesn't do it, it can certainly be sustained by mandates within the states. But it does not require, Madam Speaker, it does not require that the federal government get involved in mandating to the states, actually mandating to everybody in America, what shall be done with insurance. And so now I've used up, I think, the two things that had some popularity in Obamacare. That's it, 26-year-old insurance and no denial of pre-existing because of pre-existing conditions to children and whose parents have a policy. But if I want to go out and buy a policy that ensures that my children could stay on it, that policy is available in the marketplace. I will say this, that before Obamacare wrecked the markets, drove out a number of health insurance companies, we had 1,300 health insurance companies in this country viable in the marketplace, competing, providing all kinds of policy varieties for customers to choose from. In fact, over 100,000 health insurance policy varieties, 1,300 companies, 100,000 policy varieties. We had plenty of competition. Obamacare has driven out competition. It's not added to it. It's driven out competition. It's made it harder. It's driven up costs of health care. The indecision and the fear of what's happening has caused the entire health care industry to be frozen in place. And now they come along and say, well, if you're not going to repeal it, can you accommodate me in some way? Perhaps some way like grant them a waiver. I'm hearing individuals say, I want my waiver. They know that there have been 1,040 waivers that have to Obamacare. Well, Madam Speaker, I know that there are people out there that are listening that maybe don't understand what that means. And here's this. Obamacare is the law of the land. It is imposed upon everyone in America. A law is to be applied to every individual in an equal fashion. I mean, we might sit in different categories. We might have Medicare that applies differently to somebody 65 than it does somebody 60 years old. But waivers to statutes, to entities, individuals and entities, from my standpoint, it's unheard of. And where that authority came from, I did not see that coming. But this administration has found out that they pushed a law that's so bad that they are granting waivers to companies, to entities, entire states like the state of Maine. And now we find out that one of the people who has taken credit for helping to write Obamacare, the gentleman from New York, who I believe is a candidate for the mayor of New York City, now is calling for a waiver for the city of New York to Obamacare. So maybe if he gets his way, that won't be 1,040, it'll be 1,041 waivers. That's appalling to think that you would sit in a strategy meeting and session and try to drive a policy that I believe is flat-out socialized medicine and argue that it's good for everybody in America because they're too ignorant to take care of their own health care, and now find out that the policy is so ignorant you want a waiver from it for the largest city in America. That's appalling to think that that would happen. 1,040 waivers. 1,040 waivers. Let me see. The IRS will enforce this, punish people with an extra penalty if they don't comply. Let me see the easy formula, the easy form for the IRS is the 1040EZ. And we've had 1040 waivers, 1,040 waivers. It's easy for them, Madam Speaker, but it's not going to be easy for anyone who doesn't get a waiver. And we have this thing called the Equal Protection Clause. It's in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment. Everybody's going to be protected with equal protection. Obamacare itself violates the Equal Protection Clause because it gives some American citizens a different standard than others. And I'm thinking of Florida, their Medicare Advantage, which they have an exemption from under Obamacare, even though the Cornhusker kickback was removed because actually Nebraskans rejected it, to their great credit. Floridians didn't reject their exemption so that they kept their advantage. That was an existing policy that exempted them from the wipeout of Medicare Advantage that happened to people like Iowans, for example. Equal Protection Clause? Not hardly. It's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. It's an unconstitutional bill of Obamacare. But I forgot to tell you, Madam Speaker, all the reasons why it's bad. It cannot be afforded. It's a $2.6 trillion total outlays for the first full 10 years once it would be implemented. And it increases taxes almost to that much over that period of time. It cuts Medicare, which is going to have a huge increase from 40 million to 70 million recipients of Medicare over the next few years. That huge increase, it cuts Medicare $532 billion. It purports to reform Medicare. Well, this cut we know has got to actually happen. It just simply calculates it into the CBO score. Obamacare cannot be, we can't afford it. It's unsustainable, therefore. It will reduce the research and development. It will increase lines and delays, and it will ration care, and it'll take that care out of the cost of many people and put it on a mandate that will force more into Medicaid. And there'll be companies that will be forced off of the coverage they now provide for their employees and force those people onto a program that's federally subsidized where there is there's a fund that will fund their health insurance premiums, which is also unaffordable. All these things are bad. There's so many bad things about Obamacare that I don't think there's any one person in the country that could stand up in 30 minutes and list all of the bad things about Obamacare. It boils down, though, to this. It's unaffordable, it's unsustainable, it reduces research and development, it reduces the quality, it lengthens the lines, it delays the service, it rations the care. It takes away one more thing. The most important thing about Obamacare is this. I believe it is an unconstitutional takings of American liberty. It's unconstitutional in a number of ways, 3 or 4 ways at least. And American liberty is something that is precious. And to think that the federal government would step in and commandeer, usurp the God-given liberty and right that we have to manage our own health care and turn it into a ration service according to formula that only government would decide who would get what service and when, and who would be on the waiting list for surgery and who would be on the waiting list to die without surgery. That is a result of Obamacare. It cannot be argued or refuted. They put you on a waiting list for a hip replacement, or they put you on a waiting list to die without. That's one of the things that happens. They don't seem to think that's what they're doing willfully. And I don't accuse them of willfully wanting to do that. It's a consequence of the thick-skulled action of people who believe that there is a socialist model to produce their version of utopia rather than the individual dynamics that come from people that have free choices. But we're a vigorous people, Madam Speaker. We're a unique people. We're the kind of people that recognize from the beginning that our rights come from God. We're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that pursuit of happiness wasn't the pursuit of hedonism. It was the pursuit of perfection, just the pursuit of perfection, both the intellectual and physical improvements. That's the pursuit of happiness in the Greek form, and that's what our Founding Fathers understood. That's what our Founding Fathers understood. We're a unique, vigorous people with rights that come from God, and of all of the things that flow through with this, These rights, many of them laid out in our Bill of Rights: freedom of speech, religion, and the press, freedom to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances, the freedom to the right to keep and bear arms. The right to keep and bear arms, the property rights that are in the Fifth Amendment, the right to protection of trial by jury, to be tried by a jury of your peers, and the right of protection against double jeopardy, the rights that come from that are endowed to the states and then the people respectively in the Ninth and mostly the 10th Amendment. All of that are unique things to Americans, and they don't apply to Western European democratic socialist states, or should I say social democratic states. They don't apply to people in Canada. They don't have that same level of rights. They don't apply to people in Mexico or any place else in this hemisphere or any place else on this planet. These rights, as understood and envisioned by our founding fathers, apply only to Americans. And they are the foundation. They're the foundation of why Americans are a unique and vigorous people. And they're the foundation of why we are the unchallenged greatest nation in the world. And we have a unique vigor. And that vigor comes from the foundation of these rights. But, Madam Speaker, I would take the position that you could take all of these rights that we have, that we identify as coming from our Creator, from God, and you can bestow them upon any other people on the planet and ask them to go out and build a vigorous society that would match and mirror that of America. And I will submit that that effort would fail. It would fail no matter if they had unlimited natural resources, if they had free enterprise to no end, if they had a reverence for the Constitution the way we do. You could take this package, this vision of American rights and Constitution, you could put it in the richest land in the world, or the poorest, and offer it to any people on the planet. And I will submit that they could not succeed in producing another country that has the vigor and the success that this country has. And I'm not standing here, Madam Speaker, taking credit for this. I'm standing here giving reverence to this gift that we have that is America. And I will continue that of all of the rights that are the foundations of those beautiful marble pillars of American exceptionalism and the free enterprise component that goes along with it, the property rights, freedom of speech, religion, and the press, and the list goes on. There's one other component that no other nation can have. Excuse me. Excuse me. There's one other component that no other nation can have, and that is the unique vigor of the American people. And we are a people that have been blessed by the vigor of every donor civilization on the planet, no matter the country. The people that came here, the legal immigrants that came to the United States, came here with the vision of the American dream. They were attracted to the vision of the American dream, and so we were able to, by good sense of circumstance and forethought and vision, skim the cream of the crop off of every donor civilization on the planet. The people that had a vision, that had a dream, that had ambition, that wanted to test themselves, that wanted to build something that went beyond their generation, people that wanted to leave the world a better place than it was when they found it, people that wanted to prepare the ground for the next generation to farm, so to speak, and in some cases literally. These are the people that we got that came to America from every country, whether it would be England or Scotland or Wales or Poland or Germany or Italy or any of the countries on the planet, all across Asia, all across Central and South America. People that had a vision that they wanted to live free and breathe free and build something and have children and grandchildren that could benefit from their labors and their vision and their intuitiveness and their creativity and the entrepreneurial nature. They came to America. And that set up a natural filter for people to save up enough money and to get passage to come to the United States. Some of them sold themselves for as long as 7 years of labor just to pay the passage to get here. That's a dream. You don't get any cults that come like that. You get people that are vigorous. And we've attracted them, and that's the American spirit. This vigorous American spirit is totally unsuitable for a social democracy or socialism or hardcore leftist communist Marxism or any of those other utopian philosophies that many of them emerged out of the non-English speaking portion of Western Europe. And their philosophies permeated a lot of the components of the globe because they're built upon class envy, but they're not built on the truths of human nature, nor are they built upon our rights coming from God. And so here we are in this country. Fantastic that we are the recipients of such gifts. And the gifts that we have and the vigor that we have, we need to understand what it's rooted in. And it's rooted in these freedoms. And it's rooted in the filter that filtered out people that wanted to come here but didn't have quite the ambition to make it happen. It was hard to get here. And you had to have a dream to want to come here. And when you came here, we respected hard work and smart work and people that planned and invested, and they were rewarded. And we admired them and raised our children to emulate them. How many people like Donald Trump today, even though, well, I guess I don't have anything bad to say about Donald Trump, not here into the record, but because he's been successful, people admire him. Bill Gates, because he's been successful. Steve Jobs, they admire him because he's been successful. They've been successful because they've been entrepreneurs, they've been creative, they've worked within the free market system, they have made our lives better and improved the quality of our lives and lowered the cost of the services that we need for our quality of life to be upheld, and made those contributions and gotten rich in the process. That's the free enterprise system. And so here we are, these vigorous people, and some of the nanny state advocates here in this Congress, well, actually it was a majority of them last year, decided they wanted to impose Obamacare on us and take away our personal vigor. They wanted to take over the responsibility of managing our health care. What they finally did was, because Obamacare is right now the law of the land, they nationalized our skin and everything inside it, a government takeover of my body. The government took my body over and the body of 308 million Americans, and now they're going to tell us when we get health care, under what conditions we get health care, that we must have their health insurance policy that they prescribe for us. They've taken away our individual responsibility. They've nationalized our skin and everything inside it, and they had the audacity, and the President's fond of that word audacity. It was in the title of one of his books, The Audacity of Hope. The President of the United States had the audacity to impose a 10% tax on the outside of the skin that he nationalized inside of if you go into a tanning salon to turn yourself a little browner. That is a reach of the nanny state to impose a tax. They wanted to tax your non-diet Coke. They want to manage our lifestyles in such a way that they'll tax us if we eat fat foods, and then I presume we should get a discount if we eat healthy foods. This is a nanny state personified. Obamacare is so bad. It's bad because of all the things that I've listed about the cost and the quality and the lines and the rationing and the net result of all of that, Madam Speaker. But the worst part is, it is an unconstitutional takings of American liberty. It takes from us the ability, the right, to manage our own health care, and it must go. And when that legislation was passed and signed into law, I believe the anniversary date was March 23rd of this year. I laid awake most of the night and slept a little bit and got up in the middle of the night and drafted a piece of legislation to repeal Obamacare. It was waiting at the door of the service team to be formally put into the form of a bill when they opened up that morning. Very interestingly, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota had done the same thing. And her legislation came down within 3 minutes of mine, exactly the same 40 words that said, we're going to repeal Obamacare, and as if it had never been enacted, for the last words in the bill. 40 words, repeal Obamacare, gives the names of the bill, the numbers of the bills, etc. The last line, as if it had never been enacted. Rip it out by the roots, Madam Speaker. Now, that was not necessarily unheard of, but there aren't many precedents in the history of Congress for repeal legislation to be filed actually, well, the next day after a huge piece of legislation has been passed. But that is what we did, and we started down that path immediately, working to get signatures on the bill and building up the support to repeal Obamacare. By midsummer, we had a discharge petition. By the end of the 111th Congress, going into the election is the only part that counted, we had 173 signatures on my discharge petition. People that wanted to see Obamacare repeal come to the floor, bypass the committee process, bypass the Speaker's ability to kill a bill before it got here, bring it to the floor for a vote. 173. We needed 218. And the message that went out across America was useful in that some members of Congress that are here today will say straight up they wouldn't be here if it were not for the discharge petition, and they could challenge their opponent to sign it, and almost every Democrat refused to do so. And now there are 87 new freshman Republicans. Every single one has run on the repeal of Obamacare. As far as I know, everyone has run on the defunding of Obamacare. And I know that every single Republican in the House of Representatives voted for H.R. 2, which is the repeal of Obamacare. And I know that every single Republican in the United States Senate voted to repeal Obamacare. The language that we generated then is the language that emerged into H.R. 2. And today, every Republican and some Democrats are on record voting to repeal Obamacare. And now that didn't stop there. The strategy that I put together almost a year ago was this, that we needed to win the majority, which we did, bring the repeal of Obamacare, which we did. It didn't succeed in the United States Senate, but behind that always was this majority here in the House of Representatives has an obligation to cut off all funding that would be used to implement or enforce Obamacare. And I've been consistent with that language all the way through last summer, into last fall, and past the election and beyond. Repealing Obamacare, then cut off the funding to Obamacare, stop the implementation of Obamacare, and stop the enforcement of it by shutting off the budget dollars, and hold this waste of money to this unconstitutional bill of Obamacare until such time as we can elect a president who will sign the repeal. The date for that to happen in my strategy is January 20th, 2013, Madam Speaker. And that's the date that the next President of the United States will be inaugurated out here on the west portico of the Capitol building. And when that President stands there and takes that oath of office, it's my vision and my dream and my commitment to work towards it. I'm going to ask him, take your oath of office with pen in hand, Mr. President-elect. And I'm going to ask you to solemnly swear to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States to the best of your ability. So help you God. And when that statement's made and it's completed and the oath of office is finished and he's formally the President of the United States, and before that new President on January 20th of 2013 shakes the hand of Chief Justice John Roberts, I want that pen in his hand to come right down to the parchment, and I want him to sign the repeal of Obamacare right there on the podium on the west portico of the Capitol, right out there, as the first act of the next President of the United States. That's my vision, that's my commitment. But until then, shutting off funding to Obamacare is a must-do. And most of America knows by now that there were $105.5 billion automatically appropriated in a deceptive way by the way the bill was drafted up in Nancy Pelosi's office, not going through committee, not had the work of the will of this Congress, but drafted up in her office and dropped on us with hardly any notice and certainly no time to inform the American people of what was in it. Automatic, unprecedented in their scope appropriations for the tune of $105.5 billion, Madam Speaker. And already it automatically appropriated in the 2010 budget, plus that's $18.6 billion, $4.95 billion in the 2011 budget, totals up to $23.6 billion already appropriated, almost all of it set aside for the purposes of implementing Obamacare. And we must have a showdown. We must face the President down. If the President demands that Obamacare be funded, what are we going to do? Say no, Mr. President, and he vetoes legislation that would otherwise fund all of government? And if President Obama does that, or if Harry Reid continues to perform as his proxy and shuts off anything that we send over that way, even though we've demonstrated our desire to keep the legitimate functions of government, all of them functioning, the President shuts it down or Harry Reid shuts it down and this government comes to a halt. Here's the irony. The irony is this. Lights would go out in federal offices around this land. Not all of them, because essential services will keep going, but lights will go out. And as the lights go out in the non-essential service federal offices, what will be going on in the other offices? Obamacare will continue, even in a government shutdown, to be implemented because there's $23.6 billion sitting in their pot to spend out of to implement Obamacare. And we could have shutdown after shutdown, and Obamacare is implemented and implemented. We must hold the line. We must stand on this principle. It is our obligation. It is unconstitutional. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution, too. And that includes defending the Constitution and opposing unconstitutional legislation with every tool at our disposal. The President and the Democrats, I believe, Madam Speaker, planned to shut this government down. That's why they agreed to a continuing resolution in December that funds the government until March 4th. It was to bring this to a head. They wanted to box us into a corner and then blame Republicans for shutting the government down. Well, it's real clear. Republican leadership wants to avoid a shutdown. It's clear to me that Democrats are determined to provide a shutdown and try to blame it on Republicans. And it's clear to me that if we fund all the functions of government except Obamacare, and if the President brings about a shutdown, it won't be the House Republicans. It will be Harry Reid as proxy for the President. If that happens, what we're going to see happen here is the President of the United States could veto an appropriations bill that funds everything except Obamacare. It would be a presidential executive tantrum that he would be throwing. That tantrum that he'd be throwing would be saying this, that his signature piece of legislation, Obamacare, means more to him than all of the other legitimate functions of government combined. That's the scenario that we are in. The American people will render a verdict when that day comes, that there is that kind of a showdown, and it must come. The American people will render a verdict. They will side with us. They were not going to side with the President who has imposed Obamacare on us. 62% of Americans want it repealed. 51% intensively want to do so. Only 24% want to keep it in any kind of a vigorous way. And so, Madam Speaker, I'll say this. We have an obligation to stand and hold our ground. This showdown will come. It must come. If it doesn't, we'll be capitulating to the President in every way that he's willing to fight. I say stand our ground now. Let's have this fight now. Let's get it over with, and let's get on with the business of the 112th Congress. With that, Mr. Speaker, excuse me, Madam Speaker, I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We appreciate the opportunity to address the assembled body tonight. As one of the few combat veterans in the U.S. Congress, I rise to express deep concerns about what we are doing in Libya at this moment. Mr. Speaker, we have committed the U.S. taxpayers and we've committed U.S. troops to engagements that have extended almost a decade, having been involved in one of those long overseas engagements before in Vietnam. I know that the strain that these actions place on our families and on our young soldiers, and I don't think that the administration has adequately thought out what we are doing and what we're asking the taxpayers of this country to do and the young people of this country to do, engaging in yet a third front with questionable ideas and questionable values at the heart of why we're engaging in the discussion. I've been an ardent supporter of the war on terror. I believe that we're going to be committed to the war regardless if it is there in their backyard or in our backyard. But I rise tonight to say that I'm adamantly opposed to extending our forces any further than what we've already extended them without asking our allies to provide their tax money and to put the lives of their young people on the line. The entire world is benefiting from the sacrifices that this country is making to establish order and to establish some modicum of peace in regions that are not given naturally to such. And since the world benefits, then the world has a responsibility. So I think the President should be calling on our allies to fund the NATO mission and to provide the people, the personnel, and the weapons. And yet, as I look at a breakdown of the missions that have been flown and fought so far, I find a dominance of U.S. cost in lives, in hours, monetary resources, and in morale. As a veteran, I find it disturbing that we're in 2 wars and now intervening in a 3rd with no end in sight. Our mission is unclear. Having served in Vietnam at a time when our nation was beginning to withdraw support for that war, and remembering being there in those countries when funding was made short and gasoline and fuel was taken from stateside missions in order to fly combat missions, I remember with dismay a nation that was not fully supporting the combat troops. I find these actions to be questionable on behalf of our Commander-in-Chief as it regards Libya. Despite his speech last night, President Obama simply raised more questions. He explained that America is different. I'm not certain of exactly how that rationale applies to putting young men and women in harm's way, but I don't think it is a deep enough explanation. What is the time frame? The President has yet to clarify. Are we there to enforce a no-fly zone? Then let our friends and neighbors in the United Nations enforce the no-fly zone. If we're there to enforce a no-fly zone, why then are we bombing ground troops? They don't affect the no-fly zone. If the goal was to protect civilians, why did Secretary Clinton meet with a rebel leader in London? Why is Secretary Clinton calling for Mr. Gaddafi to step down if we're only enforcing the no-fly zone and protecting civilians? This war is going to go back and forth, and already you see our leaders wondering if we can be out by the end of the year, and I wonder if we can be out by the end of the decade. Now, make no mistake about it, if Libya had done something to harm us, to put our troops in danger, I would be 100% supportive, but I question extending us and our troops to one more war zone. Why are we fighting a war that Secretary of Defense Robert Gates said bears no strategic interest to the U.S. and does not jeopardize our national security? Why are we working on the side of the rebels? Their own commander has stated that al-Qaeda members who fought our troops in Iraq are now fighting Mr. Gaddafi. In Libya, we're working with the same people we're trying to kill in Afghanistan. Not only that, but it looks like we're arming those same troops. And I worry that our armaments supplied to troops in Libya will show up in the fight against Americans in Afghanistan and Iraq. As a combat veteran, I find these concerns to be deeply disappointing in an administration who for nearly 2 weeks could not point to whether NATO, the U.S., France, or the United Kingdom was in charge. This is poor management, a management I saw during the Vietnam War, with little sense of purpose and always a confusion about exactly why we were there and how long we would stay. Humanitarian missions are admirable. However, sending troops in to combat with no apparent overarching mission is dangerous. Everyone in this room remembers Somalia in 1993. Why are we singling out Libya? There's a war going on in the Ivory Coast right now. Saudi troops have cracked down on protesters in Bahrain in recent weeks, with civilian deaths reported. Not a whisper of American intervention there. According to the Genocide Intervention Network, since 2009, almost 1 million people have been displaced in ongoing fighting in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. 5.6 million civilians are estimated killed since 1996. Are we going to intervene there? Saddam Hussein killed hundreds of thousands of his own people using mustard gas and other weapons. The President was totally opposed as a senator to that war, despite the fact that it had congressional authorization, and yet here he is leading us into this new conflict. The President needs to consider the fact that the mission is unclear, despite his speech last night. He needs to realize that America cannot intervene in wars where we face no threat to our national security and have no strategic interest. He should listen to his Secretary of Defense. As we engage in this yet third conflict, we're going to continue to put budget pressure on a budget that is straining beyond belief. In this country, the greatest threat that we face right now is a mounting national debt that is almost $15 trillion, almost the equivalent to our entire gross domestic product. At the time when we're expending more resources and more dollars in a conflict that has to be yet determined as to its scope, purpose, and length, we're straining our budget even further. And while we're conducting these outside forces to greater cost to our U.S. government, we're conducting a war on the West in this country and choking the West of jobs right now. So at a time when the cost to our government is increasing, we're choking down the tax resources by simply regulating and taxing jobs out of existence. In the past 10 days, most of us were at home at work in our districts. I, like everyone else, made a lot of miles in the last 10 days. We drove almost 1,300 miles and did 20 and 30 and 40 events, meeting with people and listening to their concerns, and everywhere we heard the same concern. What are you doing about jobs? And my sad report had to be that this government, instead of creating jobs, is in fact choking off jobs. This government is in fact making it impossible for employers to bring on new laborers, to expand the workforce and create that sense of prosperity that this nation has always had available to it. And people would ask why. And they would also ask how. How is our government choking off jobs? They find it incredulous. They don't want to believe me when I say that in our speeches to begin with. How is our government choking off jobs? So I use as an example the Forest Service. This nation used to have a vibrant logging industry, a timber industry that employed hundreds of thousands. Just in New Mexico, a very small state, over 20,000 people made their living in the timber industry in New Mexico. Today, no one makes their living in the timber industry in New Mexico. Over 20 mills have been idled. The woodcutters and the choppers no longer have work. Our mountain communities that used to depend on logging now depend on tourism, which is a very distant second as it provides incomes for our families to live. and pay their bills on. Our government put an entire industry out of work in the 1970s with a program, with a regulation based around the spotted owl. The theory was that if we wanted to protect the owl, we had to limit all the activity in the forest. And so we simply killed the forest, the timber cutting jobs in our national forest across this country. And nowhere did it hit harder than in New Mexico. Our government said you can no longer go into the forest and cut trees because we're going to reserve the entire amount of land for the spotted owl. And an industry was killed overnight. Right now in New Mexico, the oil and gas industry hires about the same number of people that the timber industry used to hire. About 23,000 people now work for oil and gas. We provide energy for much of the world, much of the country. And yet those jobs now are at risk because the Fish and Wildlife Service just recently announced that they're going to list a lizard as an endangered species. Now keep in mind that this lizard is seen everywhere. But when people ask me, what's so significant about this lizard? I tell them, well, you just can't count the lizards out there. You have to stop them. You have to raise them up, raise their arm, and count the number of scales between the elbow and the shoulder underneath their arm. And the endangered lizard has one less scale, or one more scale, I'm not sure which, than the other lizards. And people are saying, wait, your government would kill our jobs over one scale under a lizard's arm, his front leg? And they're simply aghast that with 9.5% unemployment, that our government would be undertaking such punitive ways of interpreting the Endangered Species Act. Now, my belief is that we can keep the spotted owl alive in our forests and cut timber, and my belief is that it'll make healthier forests. And so we have introduced a bill which simply says, yes, we want to keep the spotted owl alive in sanctuaries. We'll make 1,000 acres here, 1,000 acres over there, but in the million acres in between, we're going to allow logging for the first time in a couple of decades. For the first time, the mountain communities that used to thrive on timber cutting have the opportunity for jobs. But even more than that, as we cut trees, New Mexico is a very arid climate. What used to happen is that fires would burn the trees down to where there were only about 50 per acre. So we were broad savanna lands with our national forest scattered trees. You can visualize how many 50 per acre is. That would be widely spaced with grass in between. And when the rains would come, the water would soak in and recharge the aquifers, but also recharge the aquifers around our stream. Since we have stopped cutting trees in our national forest, they now are crowded from 50 trees per acre to 2,500 trees per acre, and now then the streams are running dry because the trees use up so much more water than the grasslands that were native to the region. Instead of percolating down, the water is now soaked up by the trees and transpired into the atmosphere, causing our communities to be running out of water, our rivers to be running dry, irrigation that used to provide jobs to be gone, all in the name of the spotted owl. Now, I believe that a reasonable society can protect the spotted owl and create jobs, and that's the purpose of my bill. But before we go and rescue an industry from the past, we have to fight the fight to keep American oil being produced here, because the listing of that lizard has the potential to shut down all of the oil and gas jobs in a 3-county region and maybe even across the entire state. That's still unclear. We have people beginning to show up in large numbers to demonstrate against a government that is becoming too insensitive, too concerned about the hypothetical, and not concerned enough about people who are just struggling to make ends meet. We find citizens who are simply aghast that this government would be killing jobs at a time when our economy is struggling so bad. And at the very time that we're struggling to keep our industry alive from some nameless bureaucrat we find our president going to South America to see what he can do to invigorate an oil industry there. My friends, this is a time for us to produce American jobs and American energy. Now, I believe that we can produce energy and protect the species. I believe that we can produce energy and keep our environment clean. And I can believe that we can produce American jobs while protecting species, the environment, workers. I believe that we can do it all, and I believe that Americans insist that we do it. They don't want to see the species go extinct, but neither do they want jobs to be shipped overseas in the name of some value they don't quite understand. Now, the truth is that where we have stopped logging, the trees are too dense for the spotted owl now. The habitat, instead of getting better, has gotten worse. And right across the street in the Mescalero Indian Reservation, where they can log at their own will, and they have been logging, the spotted owl prefers that habitat because they need to sit on the branches. They jump off the trees, they get flying speed, they're able to overtake the rodents or whatever it is they live off of. And so the habitat we were trying to protect actually is simply not suitable now for the spotted owl, and they're moving over next door. And we've done this in the name of some science that has never been made clear to us, and it's very similar to what's going on with the lizard. They're going to list some species that I suspect there is no DNA difference between the 5-ring lizard and the 6-scale lizard and the 5-scale lizard. I suspect that that's a mutation rather than a DNA difference. I suspect that there is no science on it. And so we joined with people in our district this week to begin to say publicly to the government, enough is enough. You're making promises with our money that you can't keep. You're committing us to more wars. You're committing us to more social payments. You're committing the taxpayer to a higher burden. At the same time, you're causing dwindling taxation into the government coffers by killing our jobs. And people are saying it is enough. We saw in the last election a turnout of incredible magnitude of people saying that the government is not listening and we don't care about what the government is doing anymore. The frustration is deeper and deeper. And frankly, I encourage that because I believe that the only hope in turning back a government that is too strong, a government that does not care, a government that is willing to take jobs from its people, a government that is willing to commit our troops anywhere in the world in the name of whatever vague policy they have, is a government that is out of control. This needs to return to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We have set up on our web page places where you can go and make comment to the government. You can call our office here and make those comments, and we will relay those comments for you. So understand that we are in a fight for the future of this nation, in a fight for our economy, and the greatest enemy is the government itself. The government intervenes in ways that it has no constitutional authority. The government intervenes with increasing tax policies so that even our president said in the State of the Union message that we are too highly taxed in our corporations and we need to get that in control. Let our president get that in control. We will vote gladly for such tax decreases here on the floor of this House in order to ensure that jobs are created. The greatest reason that our jobs are going overseas are two: taxation policy and regulation policy. Regulations like the spotted owl, regulations like the listing of the lizard, regulations like the choking down of our financial system by the regulators now who are going into banks and scaring them by threats of fines. We are choking our economy down in the name of safety and security and achieving neither. The sad thing is that we could cure most of our economic ills if we simply grow the economy. Actuarial tables tell us that if we had 3.5% rate of growth, that our economic problems in the states and in this government began to disappear. And you would ask, is 3.5% possible? Well, that's exactly the rate we have averaged for the last 75 years. But today, because of our policies of overtaxation, overregulation, our unfriendliness to business in general, we find ourselves stuck at about 1 to 1.5% rate of growth. Thus, we're finding the pressure on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We're finding the pressure of the $15 trillion debt. We're finding the pressure of $1.5 trillion deficit. In order to meet those pressures, our Federal Reserve is beginning to print more and more money, so we're seeing prices skyrocket. So at a time when jobs are scarce and people worry for the future, we're seeing prices of gasoline go up, prices of vegetables going up, the prices of gold, silver, iron, everything is going up, not because their value has increased since last year or last month, but because the value of your dollar is decreasing because we're printing so many. And even then, we still are having increased pressure. We find the Japanese are not going to be able to lend us money. They typically were large buyers of our Treasury bills, meaning they were loaning the government money. Not for a long time. China is beginning to decrease its holdings of Treasury bills, and we're hearing these vague messages that our bankers, Chinese, Japanese, our own citizens, think our economy is out of control. Our debt and our deficits are out of control. So they're saying no more. We're not going to lend you any more. That then drives the Federal Reserve to make up the difference by printing money. That's an avenue that some of the worst economies in the world have pursued. In Argentina last year, Argentina had a rate of inflation of 1,500%. That means if you began the year with $1.5 million in the bank, at the end of that year, you had about 100,000. And at the end of next year, it's going to be down under 100,000, under 10,000. So in just 2 years, if you had a nest egg in retirement, it will become of no value. That's the path that Argentina chose, and it's the path now that we're beginning to choose. Endless deficits, endless debt, wars that bankrupt us with no reasonable explanation of why we're in those wars. And it's that situation that the American taxpayer faces today. It's that situation that causes me to stand and say America has done enough. American soldiers have done enough. American taxpayers have done enough. Let our friends come to the table. Let our friends begin to shoulder their share of the burdens. Meanwhile, let us begin to cut the spending here in Washington. We can cut many ways without cutting the actual outcomes to people. We have duplicate agencies, we have waste, we have fraud, we have abuse. Cut those. But on the other hand, begin to grow our economy and create jobs in industries that used to be here, industries that would start up overnight. These are not 10 and 20-year plans. These are ideas that can begin immediately. The people would begin to work in the forest immediately if we would let them. They would begin to drill wells again. Offshore, we could get our deep water platforms to working once again. Those have been idled by a government that is too powerful and has shut down over 100,000 jobs offshore. These are the reasons that we're having the economic difficulties that we do. And when we have difficulties as the world's largest economy, the Germans said it best, when you sneeze, you, the U.S., sneeze economically, you give the rest of the world flu. If we will begin to set about creating American jobs, producing American energy, American timber, American manufactured goods, up and down the economic spectrum, then we can cure not only our economy, but we can cure the world's economy. And I believe that we're going to do that. I believe that because the American people are beginning to stand and insist on it. Their insistence is patient, their insistence is respectful, but it's insistent nonetheless, and it has no waver, no quiver to it. It says, fix the problems. Come to this city of Washington and vote not like Republicans, not like Democrats, but like Americans. And when we begin to do that in this body, I believe that the American people will come together and support us in rekindling that greatness that lies within this country, that American exceptionalism that people for generations have come here to find, leaving everything behind, leaving families, a culture behind, leaving their own language behind. And they've come here for generations to find those words, opportunity and hope, which have been so deeply ingrained into the fabric of this nation. And that is what I believe that we should be engaged in at this moment in this body. Madam Speaker, I would yield back the balance of my time, and thank you.
Thank you. Yields back. Does the gentleman from New Mexico